Good evening and welcome to tonight's Virginia 5th Congressional District Town Hall with Congressman Tom Garrett. For those of you who would like to ask a question of your congressman, please dial *3 now. For those of you who would like to sign up through our email list throughout the duration of tonight's program, please dial 6 at any time. Again, if you would like to ask a question at any point during tonight's program, please dial *3 and you will be connected with our call screeners who will ask your name and your locality, or you can dial *6 at any time to sign up for our email e-newsletter updates list. Here now for tonight's 5th District Telephone Town Hall, your Congressman, Tom Garrett.
Hey, thank you everyone who has chosen to be on the call tonight for this, I believe our 15th Town Hall and our 42nd public forum to include 29 different high schools across the district, and I think there are 41 public high schools. I'm going to start out by talking briefly about some activities in the realm of foreign affairs because we sit on that committee. I was also told that I needed to buy some time for calls to filter through, so here we go. Obviously, everyone is aware of the termination of the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson from that position. I did not have the honor of knowing Mr. Tillerson terribly well personally, but have worked briefly with him. I will tell you that my understanding is that Mr. Tillerson had sort of freelanced on occasion as it related to foreign policy. I would relate the role of the Secretary of State to that of the first sergeant in a military unit. And the first sergeant's role is to execute the commander's intent, and there's really no room for freelancing. So to the extent that I'm very grateful for Mr. Tillerson's service, which is the truth, I'll put that out. Having said that, you can't divert from the intent of the leader of the organization, and certainly foreign policy in the Article 2 realm is well within the purview of the President. The good news is that I have not met anyone on either side of the aisle, at least behind closed doors, who speaks ill of Mike Pompeo. Now, tragically, we're in a realm where political hyperbole is everywhere, and so some of the people who say good stuff about Mr. Pompeo behind closed doors may publicly say different things, and that's tragic, but I have every confidence in his ability to execute the important duties of Secretary of State. And then the other thing, and certainly I would welcome questions related to any of this, is the naming of Gina Haspel as the new director of the CIA. Gina would not only become the first female head of the CIA, which is very interesting in light of the fact that women have an amazing role to play in clandestine services going all the way back to the American Revolution, but also would be the first person in a long time from the Ops Division. That is someone who has actually worked on operations in the field with the CIA undercover, and that brings a real perspective to the position that I think is important, because when you have policy wonks, et cetera, in that position, it's not to say that they can't do the job, but as a military leader, it was always frustrating to try to execute policy for people who had never had to implement policy. And so the fact that she's had to implement policy, I think, is really to her advantage. And I really like this pick to Ms. Haspel, not only, again, the first female head of the CIA, which I think is overdue, candidly, again, because if you know the history of clandestine and secret and covert services, women have done amazing things. But secondly, the fact that she's from the ops realm, that she's been the boots on the ground across the world, undercover, quite literally with her life on the line, I think that brings a perspective to that position that will be welcome. And certainly I can tell you again, in the view of somebody who has been an executioner of foreign policy as a junior leader in the United States military, something that I think will be appreciated by the women and men in the CIA, in the intelligence community, in the United States and candidly in the Western world. So with that, are we ready to go to questions?
Again, for those of you on the line this evening, if you'd like to ask a question at any time, please dial *3 at any point during tonight's program. And if you'd like to sign up for our email e-newsletter updates, please dial *6 at any time.
Okay, do we have Barbara on the line?
Yes. Hi, Congressman Garrett. Thank you for taking my question. I am a mom and a Republican, and I wonder about your position on banning bump stock for rifles, and what you would say to the courageous students in your district that stepped up and said, we're tired of being afraid in our schools.
Yeah, I mean, no child should ever go to school and be afraid. I genuinely admire anyone who will stand up and speak and act when they identify a need where they feel that change needs to be made. Having said that, I'm going to view the Second Amendment as it should be viewed by anyone who actually cares about the Bill of Rights, whether it's the right to privacy or due process, etc., within sort of the scope of events occurring when the document was drafted. I think that's the only way to read it, obviously understanding that when the Bill of Rights was drafted, after the freedom to associate, speak, and worship, the freedom to keep and bear arms, and the recognition of the natural law right to defend oneself, one's family, etc., was the number 2 priority of those who thought that these rights needed to be specifically outlined, and that was coming in the wake of having overthrown an oppressive government. Also recognizing the fact that gun control laws in this country have their rights in the oppression of African Americans and other minorities, that Jim Crow began with gun control, because governments are the most likely entities by which tyranny will be vested upon individuals. As it relates specifically to banning bump stocks, I'm in no hurry to address that insofar as I think if we really want to talk about gun violence, we need to talk about cheap handguns. I think that I don't think I know that hands and feet or knives or blunt objects are responsible for more deaths annually in this country than long guns. So when I was a prosecutor, we used to say, bad cases make bad law. Having said that, I don't think a ban on bump stocks would fundamentally alter the underlying concepts of the Second Amendment, but I think essentially that's really sort of something that feels good. I would challenge anybody to name 2 crimes that have been committed using bump stocks. But, I'm not overtly opposed to the debate. I think it's something we should be discussing. I just think that we need to view the Second Amendment within the context of the events surrounding the contemporaneous drafting of the Bill of Rights. So I am happy, very much so, that I've actually seen Congress move with a purpose for a change. Was able to vote for the broadly bipartisan Stop School Violence Act today. I have not seen any bill move as quickly in my 14 months in this office as that. I think it was 30 days to the day after the tragedy in Parkland, and so that's a good thing. But to the young people, to the mothers and fathers such as yourself and me, I think we need to be having a discussion. There's absolutely no excuse for that young man to have had firearms. None. It doesn't have to do with his age. It doesn't have to do with anything other than the literally dozens and dozens and dozens of public warning signs from himself, his neighbors, his school. The fact that he wasn't allowed to wear a backpack to school tells you that the school knew the nature of the threat. The fact that there were at least 30 and up to 45, depending upon what source you choose, calls to law enforcement. The fact that there were 2 calls or reports to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I think we get lulled into a false sense of security by a government that says if you see something, say something, but then the government fails to hear something, do something. So we need to have a comprehensive discussion. Again, the Stop School Violence Act, which we were a co-sponsor of, which passed the House today, is a start. And again, I'm not opposed to a discussion on banning bump stocks, but I don't think that that's the comprehensive solution to school violence. I think it is multifaceted and goes beyond any particular single instrumentality. And I got Margaret, also in Albemarle County. Go ahead, Margaret. Margaret in Albemarle. Maybe I don't have Margaret in Albemarle.
Asking for.
Oh, Margaret, I think we had you. Can you hear me?
She's on. We got Karen.
All right, Margaret wanted to talk about tariffs. Margaret, if you want to call back, if you want to email, and in the subject line, point out that it's Margaret who wants to talk about tariffs, so that we know that it's you. We'll try to get you back in the queue. Karen in Green.
Here we go. My question.
Karen?
Yes.
Are you in Greene County?
Yes, I am in Greene County.
What's your question? I do not know it.
So they took the question. I thought they had actually written it down. So I'm curious as to how you're going to vote in terms of the collection of sales tax and the omnibus package. I'm a creative entrepreneur, and the thought of collecting sales tax for every single locality and remitting that is something that would force me to shutter my business because I couldn't take the time to do that and create.
Right. So this is something, and it's been foisted upon taxpayers at the state and federal level for years. And the guys, I believe it was once called the Internet Fairness Tax, and something to that effect at the state level. I love how the mastery of oxymoronism sort of manifests itself in government, right? Because essentially what we're saying is, we want to be fair, but what we're doing is we're punishing. And look, the Albemarle region knows this firsthand by virtue of the effects of the ACA on the cost of health care. This is ridiculous. I voted against it at the state level. I'm going to vote against it at the federal level to the extent that it comes up as a separate entity. Having said that, you maybe unintentionally have sort of put me onto a subject matter that really gets me fired up, and that is the word omnibus, the nature of a funding bill that's omnibus. I joke that the road to hell is paved with omnibus legislation. We seem to not be able to walk and chew gum sometimes in Washington, D.C., which frustrates me beyond words. And it really gets worse when it comes budget season. Constitutionally, the House is responsible, and the Senate, for approving separate budgets for each particular area of government. We, for the first time in 14 years in the House, passed 12 separate spending bills. Every single one of them is languishing on the Senate side. There are things in this omnibus that I like. There are things in this omnibus that I cannot stand, that are unconscionable to me. This would fall into the latter category. Having said that, they have the tendency here in Washington to take things that are good, surround them with things that are bad, and dare you not to take the bad things in order to get to the good thing. So as it relates to the omnibus bill right now, and with specificity, the internet sales tax, I'm a no. I cannot tell you that will not change, but I can think of more reasons not to vote for it than to vote for it at this juncture. And whether it was NDAA or the first AHCA to repeal the Affordable Care Act, we've demonstrated again and again the opportunity and willingness to stand up for what we think is right, even when it flies in the face of House leadership and the administration. Because on both of the last bills I named, I can guarantee you I got a lot of pressure to vote differently. We didn't do it because we wanted to be consistent. I am not in any way supportive of trying to foist an internet sales tax upon people, which A, drives a black economy that sort of circumvents, obviously, any other revenue laws, right, cryptocurrencies, et cetera, and B, punishes people who are in the idea industry, which is really the most job-creating sector in American economic development, because ideas beget economic opportunity, which begets growth and jobs. So I'm a hard lean no on the omnibus at large, and I'm a definitive no on the single subject of internet sales tax.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for your call from Greene County. We greatly appreciate it. For those of you who are on the call this evening and you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 at any time, and we'll connect you with one of our office staff call screeners for this evening. And if you're interested in signing up for our e-newsletter updates, feel free to dial *6 at any time, and we will take your information down and ensure that you receive our e-newsletter every Saturday morning. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, any question, please dial *3 at any time and *6 to sign up for our email e-newsletter updates.
All right. So right now, the score on localities, because we've done this every time we've done a Teletown Hall, is Albemarle 2, Greene 1, and now Bedford. Carol. Carol, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. I just have this question. I found out MS-13. I saw that on the news, and they're continuing it until September, but they're in jail in Roanoke, Amherst, Blue Ridge, and I don't understand why they're not back to El Salvador. But I was told, well, it's not going to do any good to take them to El Salvador because they'll just come back over the border in another name. And I think that's just our lawyers. I think somebody needs to string them up or something, because to me, I'm having to pay. They're in jail being taken care of, and I don't like it. So what do we do about it? Can we ship them to Gitmo? What are we supposed to do? They're in Roanoke.
There's a lot of room in Gitmo because we let a whole bunch of people go, about significant percentage of whom have returned to the battlefield and been subsequently recaptured or killed. But I wouldn't say that that's the answer. I would say that when you know someone is an imminent threat to the safety and well-being of the citizens you're sworn to protect, that you should ensure that that threat doesn't remanifest itself and visit violence upon those citizens. There are a lot of things that need to be said here. Number one, there's a threshold somewhere that we could probably spend an hour discussing, wherein you don't deport somebody, you do incarcerate them. And that is the severity of the offense and the risk to reoffend. I had a conversation today in the hallway with 6 young people who had received deferrals of action under President Obama's DACA, extended by President Trump, having been childhood arrivals in this country, and suggested to them that any pathway to citizenship should come after we secure our borders, because if indeed their story is as tragic as it is, that they're brought here with against their will as children, and they wish to prevent this tragedy in the future, this starts by securing our southern border. It's common sense. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and again and again and expecting a different result. Having said that, we need to never fall into the trap of judging individuals based on where they're from or what they look like, recognizing that there are wonderful people from every corner of the world who've worked hard, in most instances, praise the Lord, legally, to avail themselves of the amazing benefits of American citizenship, right? There's a reason that we have an immigration debate in this country, and they don't have one in the South Sudan. They don't have one in China. They don't have one in Russia. They don't have one in Greece. And that is, people actually want to come here. And in order to preserve that for the people who we were elected to serve, the citizens of the United States, we need to secure our borders. Now, back to MS-13. There seems to be, I think, in some political arenas, a desire to overplay, and in some political arenas, a desire to underplay. The reality is frightening enough by itself. MS-13 certainly would constitute a very small percentage overall of those here illegally. However, the damage they do to our society is incalculable. I cannot put a dollar sign on one single human life. Beyond that, communities that are victimized by these folks within this criminal element tend to be those very communities from which they come disproportionately. Also, the acts of violence that they perpetrate are candidly almost unspeakable in a polite and public forum. The brutality, the lack of remorse, the severity, and even the frequency with some of the most serious offenders amongst this subset. Additionally, sending somebody home who's committed a murder or what have you in this country before securing the border is stupid on 2 levels. Number one, a human being is a human being, and we don't want them killing people in El Salvador or the United States. Again, there's a threshold at which you don't let them go because they're too much of a threat to humanity wherever they are. Number 2, you're right. I mean, we've had instance after instance of individuals deported 2, 5, 15 times, quite literally, who went on to create more criminal havoc. We don't need to see that again and again. Number 3, and this is one that might blow people's minds, there's a danger in illegal immigration manifest upon our society daily that I don't think gets publicized. And so here's a statistic for you. If you take the total number of alcohol driving related offenses, drunk driving offenses, in the entire country, you'll find that about 13% of those offenses are committed by people in this country illegally. Better than 1 in 10, about 1 in 9 DUI offenses are by people in this country illegally. Now, if you extrapolate that out against the 10,000 or so alcohol-related fatalities on our highways every year, that's about 1,000 people every year who are dying because of drunk driving that's done by people who aren't here legally. Most of the people who are here as immigrants, certainly almost all of those who are here legally, are fine people just like any other subset. Having said that, if 1,000 people die on our highways every year because of people who broke the laws to get here, we might ought to think about how we can prevent that. Having said that, there's no panacea of border security wherein the border will ever be completely secure. But we have for years been not trying, and I think it's really interesting to note the backlash against DACA recipients, or by DACA recipients against the very Democrats who said they supported them, because when the rubber hit the road, when the March deadline passed, those same people who made a big deal and voted against all sorts of important legislation, like putting money back into the pockets of 90% of working Americans, didn't lift a finger. And so the question then becomes, is it being hyper-politicized? If so, how can we stop? How can we solve problems instead of exploiting problems? And that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, MS-13 is a real threat. It's a real threat everywhere in the 5th District, certainly not comparable to, say, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax. Illegal immigration is a real existential threat to the lives of Americans. It's inarguable. And if you want to solve the DACA problem long-term, it absolutely positively starts with securing the borders so there's not a whole other generation of young people brought here illegally. Albert in Madison County. Albert, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. How you doing there? Hey, I want to see your name come up as one of the leads in getting some indictments and a special prosecutor against Hillary and Susan Rice and John Brennan. You know, Sean Hannity and Susan Carter and John Solomon and Peter Schweitzer. All those guys are doing a great job, so we need to put the heat on that. I'm getting really impatient about not seeing something done faster.
Well,
go ahead.
So, well, I appreciate it. Look, let's extract the political from this, and let's just pretend that the people you named, who, based on evidence that we have, use the apparatuses of the federal government to essentially illegally investigate American citizens by virtue of either having distorted or withheld data from the courts, aren't of a political party, they're just people. Now, if you do that, then you know that the federal government's power has been focused upon its citizenry without due process. In some instances, it would appear without probable cause, and that essentially the citizens have been attacked by their own government. If you want to see other examples of this, you can look at the former director of U.S. Customs and Immigration, Mayorkas, who we learned from the Washington Post gave preferential treatment to Hillary Clinton's friends on green cards for business investors in a business run by Governor Terry McAuliffe. You can look to Lois Lerner, who we learned essentially weaponized her position at the IRS. And so I would ask people to take themselves out of the political realm and go into the citizen realm. And the weaponization of a government against its very people is something that is antithetical to the ideas on which this country was founded, and I think a manifest danger to our tomorrow. I looked to Bonhoeffer as it related to the Holocaust, and he said, well, when they came for the Jews, I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't worry, and then they came for another group, and I wasn't in that group. Trust me, if we allow members of our government, elected officials, appointed officials, to exist in a legal realm where they receive special treatment and where they can weaponize the power of the government against the citizenry without due process or probable cause, we will see more of it, and it is amazingly frightening as it relates to the future of our country. Having said all of that, I function most effectively as it relates to driving policy discussions on the committees to which I'm assigned, the two operative committees as it relates, well, three, I suppose, to get into the bottom of exactly how the federal government was weaponized against the citizenry would be the Judiciary, Oversight and Government Reform, and House Intelligence. I'm not on those three. I am on Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, and Education and Workforce. So we're hopeful. I do think that the revelations as it relates to what appears to be certain misconduct by former FBI Interim Director Andrew McCabe that came out today show us something. I think it's very noteworthy that Governor McAuliffe and Hillary Clinton funneled almost $700,000 to the coffers of Mr. McCabe's wife for a political operation that she ran. $700,000 is a lot of money where I come from. Pardon the 6-month-old in the background. She wanted to ask a question, and Daddy's not ready to take her question yet. She asks hard questions. But we're trying to make sure, without a partisan hat on, that the role of government is to enforce laws uniformly against all citizens without regard to their position or status. To me, we need to get away from the political hyperbole and do that, because if a government actor, or as it would appear, government actors worked in concert, that would constitute criminal conspiracy if they did so to levy the powers of the federal government against the citizenry. And by the way, I don't know how many of you all on the phone call are familiar with Peter Strzok, the FBI employee, DOJ subordinate, and his text messages, but he had one particular text message that incensed me, that he was disgusted because he was in the South Side of Virginia Walmart and he could, quote, smell the Trump voters. I was once in the South Side of Virginia Walmart and something stunk. It might have been Peter Strzok. But my point is, if that's not political bias that goes beyond the realm of what someone responsible for investigating Miss Clinton's malfeasance with her server should express, I don't know what is.
Well, Albert, thank you very much for your call, sir. For those of you who would like to ask a question of Congressman Tom Garrett on this evening's telephone town hall, please dial *3 at any time. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, dial *3 at any time. For those of you who would like to sign up for our e-newsletter subscription list, please dial *6 at any time. Again, if you would like to subscribe for our e-newsletter, dial *6. Or if you would like to ask a question on tonight's town hall, please dial *3 at any time.
Clayton in Campbell County. Clayton, I know you had something on tariffs. Let me tell you all how this works real quickly. Go ahead, Clayton.
Yeah, good evening, Congressman. Say, listen, it's tough doing what you're doing, but you got to stay in there and you got to be tough, whether everybody agrees with you or not. The question on tariffs is this. It has to do with the attention that President Trump has brought on particularly on our capacity to produce steel and aluminum. It probably goes further than this to include other metals too, such as copper, platinum, and silver, and other precious metals. And what my wife and I were thinking is this, is that we do not, under any circumstances, even at the sacrifice of dampening employment, we do not want to see our country lose our ability to manufacture military ordnance, combat vehicles, tactical vehicles, ships, ship hulls, ship ordnance, aircraft frames, and as well as space vehicles. We do not want to see us turn our source of the materials to make these weapons over to somebody else. We just can't stand the idea of this happening. Everything in our history has shown that we have always been succeeded. When we succeed, we make our weapons ourselves with our own materials. So the question, Congressman, is my wife and I were just wondering whether, in general, whether you agree with that we should retain our...
Oh, no. So Clayton, I've studied history and education. I'm a student of history. I love history. You're absolutely correct. At the beginning of the Second World War, the United States was probably about the 5th or 6th most powerful military on earth. By the end of it, we were unrivaled, and candidly, I would wager that if you combined all the military forces in the world, not on manpower, but on the ability to produce material, we would match up against the entire world. And that's because we had an amazing production capacity. Meanwhile, we've seen the American production capacity slip in so many areas. You didn't mention lead. We do not smelt lead in this country anymore. The last lead smelting operation, I believe, was in Missouri. It closed under the Obama administration. Now what we do is we recycle car batteries and we bring in lead from Canada. Certainly, I'm not averse to responsible environmental policies, but the realm of national defense dictates a core ability to do certain particular industries. I am not a fan of tariffs. But I think what the president did in this instance was incredibly savvy because if you take a particular tool out of the negotiating toolbox before the negotiation begins, you will be able to extract no concessions based on the concept that that tool might be used. And so, while I generally don't like tariffs, it had been unspoken knowledge for years that the United States would not use tariffs, that the United States would not demand to compete on a level and we have not demand to compete on a level playing field, that the United States would allow other countries to impose tariffs on our goods while not doing reciprocally towards them. And so simply by muttering the words, the paradigm immediately shifted. Now let me give you some history on the history. A lot of the competitive advantage, and by the way, my father met my mother, who was the daughter of a career worker at the Bethlehem Steel Corporation in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, when my dad went to work for Bethlehem Steel from Virginia to Pennsylvania back in the 60s. Okay, so I know a little bit about American Steel and the lumps they've taken. Ultimately, my dad left Bethlehem Steel because my dad's values said he wanted to raise his children in a rural community that shared his values. And so we left Bethlehem Steel before the wheels fell off of that former Fortune 50 company. And everyone told my dad he was crazy because his career was moving meteorically in the right direction. 2 years later, Japanese steel pushed Bethlehem Steel to the point where it no longer exists as a steel-producing entity and only is essentially a pension plan and real estate assets. His friends all called him and said, "How in the heck did you know to leave when you did?" And he said, "I didn't know to leave when I did. I knew where I wanted to raise my children." And that's when we got back to rural Virginia. Again, conceptually, I don't like tariffs, but I like negotiating on an uneven negotiating field even worse. Now note that the imposition of tariffs has been given the caveat that countries could negotiate exceptions on a case-by-case basis. So what this threat essentially has done is create a circumstance wherein for the first time in probably 3 generations, we're negotiating from a position of strength. The other thing that it does is create a circumstance where Germany and Japan, ironically, countries that were aggressors and totalitarian regimes with no regard for human rights during the Second World War, benefited from American trade largesse in order to develop their economies. Well, Germany and Japan are kind of like the 23-year-old kid that need to move out of their mom and dad's basement. And I think what President Trump did by mentioning tariffs was give them that gentle nudge that they might need to compete on a level playing field, because when Americans sacrifice jobs and opportunity in order to subsidize nations that we have essentially wet-nursed for 3.5 generations, that's unacceptable. So again, I'm not a tariff guy. I don't like the idea. What we just did was shift the negotiating paradigm. I think it needed to be done, and it was done so with savvy.
The world economy.
I don't know who's up next. Let me tell you all real quickly while they hand me the next name how this works. So I don't know your question, but I do have essentially so what I have is Ray Lunenburg DACA. So when I say I don't know your question, I don't know your question. I generally do know the subject matter. But my sheet says it's Ray Lunenburg DACA. So Ray, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you tonight?
I can't rightly complain. If I complain, there might be a lightning strike.
That's right.
Would make some people happy, but probably, hopefully, not my wife and kids.
Well, it's 2 parts. After you were talking about the steel deal, first of all, I don't believe there's any such thing as a world economy. It's the United States of America. Period. Where would China send that stuff they make if it wasn't for us? Where would it go?
Right, and the other thing is we watched as previous administrations, and I use an S, did things like subsidize solar panels. We led the way in the technology, only to have the Chinese flood American markets with cheap knockoffs of American products and put a bunch of Americans out of jobs. What we still lead the world in, and I think will forever, if we can solve the saddling of our youngest generation with massive debt, and we can talk more about that if anybody wants to. But what we still lead the world in is ideas, but unfortunately China leads the way in stealing them and then selling them using usually slave or underpriced labor, and then destroying the very nation and economy that created the idea to begin with. So I love Chinese people. The Chinese government is not our friend. In the area
I agree. I have no problem.
We need to compete on a level playing field.
How can we give ours away for us to suffer? And they've done it for years. That's what I don't understand. But
Well,
the other thing, with the DACA thing, is just one of the issues that's in front of Congress right now. It's several major things Trump has laid in their lap, and they will not act on it.
Well, I think it's interesting because you make a good point as it relates to DACA. What President Trump has done, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA is an invention of the previous administration. What President Obama did was say, we're not going to enforce our laws if we believe, because we can't know, that you arrived here as a minor. Now, and the reason we can't know is we don't have birth certificates. Whenever you show up, you can tell us whatever age you are, and we don't necessarily know when it was that you originally got here. But deferred action isn't the answer. That's kicking the can down the road for a lifetime.
Exactly.
I'm not opposed to a pathway to citizenship if and only if we secure our border. If you leave a porous border, then what we're doing, and I think this is what we've seen from some political angles, is creating a self-perpetuating problem that will never get better but only worse, that then can be capitalized on politically by people who say you don't care. Well, I say that you don't care if you don't want to solve the problem. And literally today, as I said, we spoke with 6 different young people who are apparently, as I'm told, DACA recipients, and said, I can help with DACA if everybody will get on board on actually doing everything we can do to secure the border. Does that mean a wall from Brownsville to San Diego? No. Does it mean actually taking seriously controlling our own borders? Yes. And it's a fundamental and inherent responsibility of a federal government and a sovereign nation to control its borders. But President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill, back in the 80s, sat down and did an amnesty and said, we'll solve this problem. There was a promise in that bill to address border security. Guess what? We did the amnesty, never got around to the border security. So here we are again. Again, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. If we don't secure the border, we can just address DACA every 10 years until nobody wants to come here.
Well, see, and that poor Trump, he can't take a breath without somebody's got a problem with it. He's laid this economy. He said, make a law, deal with this situation. He will enforce it. Make a law. Decide what you're going to do.
I think you got one side that doesn't want to act because they want to continue to score political points, and another side that's paralyzed because they're unwilling to be as honest as I have been with people on this phone call. There will be people who criticize me for saying, yes, I'm willing to consider a pathway to citizenship, and that's fine. I'll take that criticism, but understand it's only after we've secured our borders. What I try to do, and I think is a sort of the right thing to do, is tell everybody the truth. The existential reality of a kid who was brought here when they were 5 is this is their home. But if you don't do anything to stop tons and tons of 5-year-olds from arriving here, then I guess that we should just have open borders because you're not bothering to control you once you have anyway. So let's solve the problem once and for all by securing the border.
Exactly, and that's what Trump wants in that bill, and that's what they won't do for some reason.
Well, you'll have to ask yourself why it would be in someone's best interest to perpetuate the problem instead of solving it. I have theories.
I agree, and another thing that burns me up is the people that are promoting the discontent with Trump that's supposed to be helping these people, but they're the ones that aren't doing it. They're the ones that
I know,
help
and it's funny
Democrats.
because the young people, the DACA recipients are starting to realize that. But let me go down a road that nobody's asked about, but I want to because it's something you just said. I had the unique honor and opportunity of speaking at lunch the other day with the foreign ministers of the Baltic states, that's Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They, along with Ukraine, understand what Russian interference means in a way that I hope that the United States never does. There has undoubtedly been Russian meddling in U.S. elections, and that has been the case probably since about 1917. But what we learned from the foreign ministers in Ukraine and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, these people in Azerbaijan, these people who live, as the Azerbaijani ambassador once told me, in a bad neighborhood because Russia's their neighbor, is that the Russians don't care about helping Trump. They don't care about helping Hillary. In fact, they did things to help both Trump and Hillary. They care about destroying the American people's confidence in their electoral system and their democracy. They do the same thing in these other countries. what they've done, and literally in the Baltics, they've shut down the electrical grid before. They did the same thing in Ukraine using cyber interference. So the Russians are about undermining our confidence in our institutions. And for any political actor to submit that somehow Russia picked a side, they didn't. The side they picked was chaos, and it was inherently anti-democratic and anti-Western, and that's the truth. And that's coming from people who would understand it a whole lot better than most Americans. And to say somehow that the Russians were picking sides in the absence of evidence to undergird that actually furthers the very ends the Russians seek to advance to begin with. That's the irony. So next caller, hang on, here comes Matt.
Well, Ray, thank you very much for your call. For those of you who would also like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett this evening, please dial *3 at any time. Again, if you would like to ask a question and be connected with one of our handy-dandy call screeners, please dial *3 at any time. And if you'd like to join our email e-newsletter updates list, which comes out every Saturday morning, please dial *6 at any time. Next on the line, we have Frank.
Frank, you're calling from Albemarle?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm in Charlottesville.
Okay, Charlottesville. I have to change the scorecard around. All right, gotcha.
It's fine. Congressman, I do appreciate you having these town halls. I don't remember anybody doing as many as you have, and it's really given me an opportunity to know you in a way that I just would not be able to do otherwise through any of the other media. So I want to say that, first of all. What my question was, and it's a very general question, is what is your view about helping people with the opioid crisis?
So I love your question. I'll tell you, I spent the better part of 10 years as a prosecutor, and I prosecuted everything ranging from murder to shoplifting and trespassing. We saw very, very few overdose deaths from things like cocaine and heroin. What we did see, and this is going back over a decade, was a fentanyl death a year at least in a locality of just over 30,000 people. So but I'll tell you this, when I watched my father, who was my hero, and you might know that if you've been on a few of these phone calls, die very quickly of cancer, I'm glad fentanyl existed. So let's not throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater as it relates to opioids. Having said that, the only way to address a crisis of this magnitude is a multifaceted sort of approach. We need to work directly with healthcare providers to include pharmacists on educating the populace. There's a very interesting article written by a guy named, I don't know his full name, he goes by Flea, and was the basis for a band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And he essentially in the article, I believe it was in Newsweek, says that during his youth he tried every drug there was. At age 30 he quit before they killed him. Then he, I believe, broke a bone in a snowboarding accident, was prescribed opioids. And in the article he talks about how he knows what it's like to be high, how he knows what it's like to be under the influence, and that the opioids that a doctor gave him made him every bit as incoherent and disabled as drugs that he'd taken recreationally as a young person. Now, I think that guy's got some perspective. I point that out, though, because I think there's a concept, and particularly tragically amongst our children, that if it comes from a medical professional, it must be safe. You know, you tell that to the twin children of a young lady who died from a fentanyl overdose probably 7 or 8 years ago when I was prosecuting. I think those kids would probably be in 2nd or 3rd grade now, and will never know their mom. You tell that to the 3 family members in the same family in a small town of about 1,200 people who died of opioid overdoses within about a 10-month period. You just can't. So we need to engage healthcare providers. We need to engage the general public to be supportive of their neighbors. We need to educate. Some of these things are manifest candidly, but best at the familial and community level. We need to be supportive and speak to our friends, our neighbors, our family members when we think there might be a pattern of abuse emerging. And we need to make sure that we track essentially these products once they get on the market. And we need to do something that no president prior to this one, and I've already told you 3 occasions where I disagree with this administration, so I'm not a sycophant, has done, and that is where we find synthetic opioids produced abroad or the precursors for illegal production of these opioids flooding our country, we need to call out the state actors that are allowing that to happen. I speak specifically in this instance to the precursors for fentanyl coming into this country from China. Too many times we've seen people put money ahead of human life. That's unconscionable. I can name multiple instances of the government of China doing just that. I can name instances, candidly, of our government and the German government doing that. The Germans, in the case of the Iran Sanctions Act of the 90s. But it has to be a community, family level attack as well as a care provider level attack and an education campaign. We need to not throw out the baby with the bathwater where we find end users with addiction problems. The answer is not necessarily incarcerating them but rehabilitating them. But where we find people dealing these drugs, they need to be dealt with decisively. So differentiate between a user of opioids who in many instances, and I know people who have seen this happen to, were legitimately prescribed these things for legitimate medical purposes and then saw it spiral out of control, oftentimes because of lack of understanding of the downside dangers of what can be a good thing when properly administered. So it's a local, state, federal issue. It really starts at the family level. And again, ultimately, Gandhi said man cannot be made good by law. We should darn sure try, whilst understanding that a good solution won't solve the problem 100% of the time in a free society. And Raleigh in Pennsylvania County. Raleigh, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
All right. You have a question, sir.
Yes, sir. Is there any way that you can help veterans that are being held back for PTSD on different situations? In my case, they have sent me 4 times to another psychiatrist, gives me 10 or 15 minutes and makes a decision. When I've been going to a psychiatrist for 25 months, you may know him in Danville, Franklin Russell, and he has put in a report for me for 100%, even wrote him a letter. And what they'll do is say, well, the psychiatrist they sent me to was the most recent. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's insane. So, let me ask you this. What branch of the service did you serve in Raleigh?
I was in the Army, Vietnam, 70.
Well, you already anticipated my next question. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I have...
matter of fact, I have wrote you, and you have sent a letter to the VA, and I think the letter that they sent back that they were, I think back February 2015 behind, well, that's how far they've been holding me back.
Well, and there's your problem. Okay, you just hit the problem. You've obviously had some experience in the VA system. If you tell me that the caregivers don't do a decent job, you'll be one of the first people to tell me that. If you tell me that the administrative system, that you get bounced around, that you get, hey, this is the most recent opinion, then you'll be sort of with the choir. And we had veterans dying in places like Arizona, not because the doctors and nurses, psychiatrists, etc., didn't care, right? I mean, you can make a whole lot more money as a doctor or a nurse outside the VA than you can in it. So these are good women and men, but the administrative system is broken. So what I want you to do is reach out directly to our Danville office. I'm going to get somebody to bring me the number because I don't have it memorized. The young man with whom you should speak there is a Marine Corps veteran of, I want to say, Ramadi, Fallujah, and Helmand province in Afghanistan. And let us try to attack this problem directly and individually. We can't solve every problem. We're not a panacea. Those don't exist. But we can daggone sure do the best we can. And that's what we'll do here. We've had some real success with VA in individual circumstances and have some great folks in district. Having said that, in the macro, now you're the micro, right? You're one person with one very real problem. But in the big picture scenario, it's mind-numbing to me that in VA, which serves, ironically, veterans, there's no uniformity in procedure. Because when I was in the Army, and I'll bet when you were in the Army, everything we did was about uniformity, about finding the best tactics, techniques, procedures, and then engaging with those TTPs as appropriate. And I find VA medical centers that actually function pretty well. And then 70 miles away is a VA medical center where people have been backlogged, whether it's a care provider on reimbursement, or whether it's a patient, or whether it's people who want to volunteer to drive rural vets to VA centers not being able to be approved for months and months and years. That's just crazy. So what we've been advocating for, in the big picture is a uniformity and sort of an overlapping with existing services in the community so the vets don't have to drive as far. But the number you want to call on a VA issue and ask for Matt, and again, it's going to take us some time to wrap our brains around it and get on it, but we'll get on it, is 434-791-2596. And again, ask for Matt.
I'm sorry to ask you again for that. I'm sorry to ask for that number again.
Yeah, I got it. 434 791. You know how hard it was for me not to say Niner?
I guarantee it.
2596.
96.
Roger that.
The other thing I wanted to kind of bring up, in my situation, I'm already a cancer survivor as of now. They removed my left lung for Agent Orange. Be August 3 years this coming August. And I'm doing 30% for velocity of air with my lung, which is only 1% rating away from being 60%. And my cancer doctor has asked me to have pulmonary testing done and sleep therapy, this type of thing. And I've been waiting for probably 9 weeks to hear from anybody on it. And I just don't understand why things take so long. And like I said, this thing of having your psychiatrist look at you, evaluate you for as long as he's evaluated me, turn in all the papers that were necessary, and then they come up with ours is more recent. And it eats me to no end, and I'm deteriorating bad, but I think that's what they're waiting on, just to see how long I'll make it and how long they can hold it off.
Well, I hope you're wrong. But I mean, it is that is the fundamental bugaboo in the VA isn't the women and men who are the frontline caregivers. It's the administrators who do. And the backstory here, real quickly, and my wife and baby are sitting across my office from me, is that I've spent a lot more time in a VA medical center in the last couple of years than I'd like to have, because my father-in-law is a vet who's been in and out. I'd say he spent more time in the last 15 months in a vet's facility than out.
Me too.
And again, he loves his frontline caregivers. The administrative process is ridiculous. So, again, you talk to Matt at that number. We will do everything we can do. There's a systematic problem that starts at the top. I think this administration is making progress. Veterans' Choice on paper is wonderful. In practice, it's not as good. Having said that, I think it's a step in the right direction. So we're going to keep on plugging. And again, thank you for your service. I got some simpatico. I spoke with a parent of a fallen Marine today, and you guys are near and dear to my heart. I always tell people who ask. One time somebody said, "You're in the Army, you're a hero." I said, "I'm not a hero, but I got to meet a lot of them." And I thank you for what you did, and we're fighting for you. So with that, Terry in Rappahannock.
Yes, I'm here.
What's your question, sir?
I want to know why you think it's such a good idea to legalize marijuana.
So I don't think it's a good idea to legalize marijuana. I think it's a good idea for the federal government to do its job. Okay? So we have a bill, H.R. 1227, I believe, that would remove the federal government from the controlling entity status on marijuana policy for three primary reasons. Number one, for the last 10 years, we've looked the other way when some states allowed something that is illegal federally to be done while sending people to prison in other states. Now, the idea of federal law is that it should be enforced uniformly without regard to what you look like, how you worship, who you love, where you're from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That they should conduct marijuana busts in the projects just like they should do them at the state university. They don't. And so the unequal and uneven application of the laws creates a circumstance that is manifestly unjust. In other words, in short, justice that isn't blind isn't justice. So we've got a federal government that won't change its laws but won't uniformly enforce its laws. That undermines confidence in the rule of law. That's number one. Justice that isn't blind isn't justice. Number two, the first time I heard the term medical marijuana, I guarantee you I laughed and thought, darn, that's clever. But having had the opportunity over the course of the last 6 years to speak to parents of children with intractable epilepsy, to speak to terminal pain management cases, to speak to people with digestive intolerance due to chemotherapy, to speak to people with traumatic brain injury, soldiers with PTSD, and Marines and airmen and sailors, to speak to NFL vets who've had an estimated 102 concussions. I've learned that cannabinoid extracts, which don't make you high, can actually address real medical problems, and yet and still the federal government has classified marijuana in the same category as heroin as having no redeeming medical use. Well, you tell that to the mom who works with other parents of children with epilepsy who've used every drug cocktail that Pfizer or any other pharmaceutical company could ever concoct, who drive to Colorado once a month and break the law in every state between here and there so that their children can set the dinner table for the first time, which is a true story, because cannabinoid extracts work. In other words, the federal government shouldn't intervene between a patient and their doctor as to what their best treatment is, and there's no reason that Israel and the Netherlands and Japan and South Korea should be kicking our tails in medical research because cannabinoids happen to be related to a plant that we've scheduled as Schedule 1 when we have cocaine, of all things, as a Schedule 2, meaning we do recognize the medical use for cocaine, but not of cannabinoids or marijuana. And finally, number three, it's not as big a deal in Rappahannock, perhaps, but in Pennsylvania and Lunenburg and Mecklenburg, in Henry and Campbell and Franklin, these folks have taken it on the chin economically again and again and again with the leaving of companies like Burlington and Lane and Dan River Mills. Literally tens of thousands of jobs have gone away. And we happen to sit at the climatological and geographical crossroads of the world for hemp, not marijuana, but hemp cultivation, right here in Virginia, and we've taken an economic opportunity out of the pockets and off the tables and away from the livelihoods of our families, our mothers and daughters and sons and fathers, by virtue of saying that industrial hemp can't be grown because it's related to marijuana. So my bill doesn't legalize anything. What it does is what the Constitution does. It allows the states to make their own rules, which means if we want it to be illegal in Virginia, we can. For the record, I voted against decrim in Virginia because of something called the Supremacy Clause that says that the states should honor the federal law. But they have it in Colorado, they have it in California, they have it in Maine, they have it in any number of states. And meanwhile, we see our laws being enforced upon one group of people while not enforced upon another group of people. That's unjust. We see people I've talked to veterans, multiple with an S, with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, who say because the VA is not allowed to cancel the cannabinoids might help with their pain, with their PTSD, etc., that they can't get the treatment that they want from the VA. The American Legion, not a radical organization, supports our position. So it doesn't legalize anything. It defederalizes it, as the federal Constitution would do, and empowers the states to make decisions for themselves because the federal government refuses to uniformly enforce the laws that it has on the books. So I don't care about marijuana, but I care about equal justice. And I care about people being free to make decisions for themselves so long as they don't harm others. And I care about economic opportunity in the 5th District of the United States. And again, it's not about getting high. It's about being American in the concept of what this country is supposed to be. What this country is supposed to be doesn't punish one group while ignoring the tribes of another. It empowers people to make decisions for themselves and empowers economic activity wherein no one is harmed. And so that's what I espouse. Sorry if I get passionate.
Well, thank you for your call. For those of you who have not had your question answered tonight, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact, and you can send Congressman Garrett an email. And for those of you who would like to sign up for our email e-newsletter list, please dial *6 at any time.
Martha Jean is calling from Nelson County.
Yes, I have more or less, it's not questions, but just things I like to get off my chest. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
yes, ma'am.
Number one, how about these kids getting out here and in protest of the guns and stuff? The families of these people that have died should have known something was up with their own children that makes them do these things. Plus, the classmates, too, would have known.
Well, I think in the case
something.
of Parkland, the classmates and the aunt of the adopted shooter, and I don't even use his name, although I could, have all indicated, and the school would not let this kid bring a backpack, right? So they knew that he was a threat to do something dangerous that would be fostered by an instrumentality that he could bring to school in a backpack. So everybody knew. The failure was systematic, wherein, again, I keep hitting the same sort of cliche, but see something, say something works as long as it results in hear something, do something. Nobody did a thing. So I will say, and I'm a strong advocate for the Second Amendment, there's no way on God's green earth that young man should have been allowed to own a gun, much less guns. He shouldn't have, because the warning signals were going off everywhere. And so, we've had failure upon failure upon failure. There's no justifying a single death. But having said that, if we want to go after gun violence, long guns aren't the problem. You can go to the FBI's statistics. Cheap handguns kill more people every day than long guns kill, in a single tragedy like Parkland. Having said that, there's no reason that any of these young people had to die, because the FBI had 2 warnings. Local law enforcement had between 30 and 45 warnings. The school had any number of warnings. My understanding of this young man's behavior is that many of the acts that he committed, and I can't put a number on it off the top of my head, could have been charged as felony offenses. Had they been charged as felony offenses, under current law, he would not have been able to have a firearm. So this gun debate is completely legit. We should be having it because this is America. But the solution may well be enforcing the laws that are already on the books, as opposed to stripping the rights of law-abiding citizens who, by definition, haven't hurt anyone and have indeed helped some people. But having said that, I'm not going to attack the children who marched, and here's why. I disagree with some of the conclusions they've reached, but standing up and every group that comes, we had 864 constituent meetings last year. Right? I have all kinds of people come into my office. Most of them are pretty amazing people. Some of them aren't. But, change starts when you stand up and speak. So the fact that these young people have reached different conclusions than me doesn't mean they shouldn't speak. They should speak. But what we have to learn to do in this country, what we're not doing well in this country, what we are world-renowned for doing, and I've served in a uniform on foreign soil where people killed each other over what day of the week they worshipped on. We have to learn to attack ideas and not individuals. We have to learn to disagree without being disagreeable, to be respectful, to acknowledge the fact that we have more that unites us as Americans, regardless of the color of our skin, where we're from, what have you, than that tears us apart. We need to understand that the balkanization of any sub-entity, any nation, etc., will lead to the demise of that nation, and that we should focus on commonality while reserving the right to protest and disagree. That's what makes us different and special. And so I think I agree with some of your conclusions. I'm not going to attack these young people. I think this discussion is legitimate. I have different conclusions on some of the questions than they do. Next question. Mac in Halifax.
Yeah, this is Mac.
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
Well, what I was wondering about, it may be a stupid question, but I'm just wondering, if they could quit changing this time back and forth, spring forward and fall backwards and stuff like that.
So I like your question. I think, Mac, first of all, there is no such thing as a stupid question. What's stupider than a stupid question is remaining stupid by not asking it. But I like your question. You would be surprised the number of questions we get about daylight savings time. I will tell you that I consider myself to be relatively well-read. I understand that the origins of daylight savings time have roots in an agrarian culture where we worked a farm, etc. That's not, tragically in some instances, the case as much as it used to be, although we do everything we can to support the hardworking women and men who raise families via farming in the 5th District. But yeah, I'm not terribly sure why we do it. There is literally an economic cost, a dollar cost to changing clocks around. I understand what it does as it relates to extending daylight hours, etc. But you all are probably privy to the story on the Florida State House. I think ultimately one day we'll see this federally. I think the reason I haven't tried to attack this headlong here as a member of Congress is we have a finite amount of bandwidth, that is time and energy. I've got a ledge office of 4 people. I've got a correspondence office of, we have one legislative correspondent, but about 3 people who work on letters and emails. I think we had, again, 864 constituent meetings last year. We had about 150-some-odd thousand letters and emails, phone calls responded to. And so we just don't have the bodies to do everything we'd like to do. But I don't think it's a stupid question. I think somebody needs to explain to me. I know why it used to make sense. Somebody needs to tell me why it still makes sense. But I don't have any problem with the idea of getting rid of daylight savings time. Having said that, if I can choose between trying to provide more affordable health care to working Virginians vis-a-vis an appropriate federal role, defending our nation against threats, foreign and domestic, properly supporting our women and men in uniform, etc., or tackling daylight savings time, so I'm not trying to diminish the importance of what you're saying. I'm just saying we haven't gone headlong into that because there are only so many minutes and hours in a day. So, but yeah, I think you're onto something. All right, I have Ms. White in Farmville, and are you on the line, ma'am?
Yes, I am.
So, go ahead with your question.
Congressman,
yes, ma'am.
I applaud you for how you answered that question concerning the young man that did the shooting, because I'm from Farmville, Virginia, and the school system here, Prince Edward, they, far as of our special needs students, sir, and their education, a lot of our special needs students are pushed into these inclusive classes, and the teachers expect for them to function as the other general ed students with an IEP. Now, I have experience with the school system. Do they follow the IEPs? No, they don't, sir. So I am pleading, please do something with the public school at Prince Edward, sir.
So, Ms. White, I got to tell you that your passion, I think, outstrips that of any caller. I have to tell you that when I was in the State House on the Ed and Health Committee, I didn't know what a big deal public ed reform was to me until I learned about some of the things going on in our schools. Now, let me back up for a minute. The constitutional mandate, not at the federal level, but at the Virginia level, is to provide an education to every child in Virginia. And so the mission of our public schools is a massive mission, and essentially the resources are so finite that they create sort of a one-size-fits-all paradigm to scale the resources available to the challenges they face. That's great for all the kids that it's great for. It's not great for the kids that it's not great for.
Right.
And so we try to do things like allow parents options to have the money follow the child only in the cases of special needs kids, only in the cases of kids who had an IEP that wasn't being satisfied in the public schools, and we ran headlong into resistance from the other side of the political aisle every single time. And meanwhile, they're the ones saying you don't care about the children. Well, here's what I know, and I candidly, in getting a little bit more personal than I normally do, and I usually get pretty personal, I get this from a personal level.
Yeah.
I totally understand this from a personal level. Let me put it this way. My life is inherently different because I had one administrator and two parents who had my back when I was a first grader. Okay? And I can't find Mr. Kyer, who was the principal at Signal Mountain Elementary School when I was in first grade, but what I'd love to, and I've looked for him on the internet, because the guy helped save my life. That plus a mom and dad who were relentless.
Yeah.
And we create circumstances, and again, I honor and respect our school teachers, but one size does not fit all.
Right.
And so we have to create pathways that acknowledge the differences in young people and how they learn.
Right.
Then we need to stop vilifying particular young people because they learn differently.
Right.
We had at some point 3 different people in my office who at some point in their life had been designated with some sort of disability. I was diagnosed dyslexic. Okay? And I can tell you this, my parents wouldn't accept failure as an option. It meant I learned differently.
Right.
Okay? And I think I've done okay. But all these young people who learn differently, who are getting told what they can't do, is wasted talent. Wasted talent. So again, I'm not going to vilify the public schools. We have to create options.
Yeah.
We have to enable parents to make decisions for children. We had a line of questioning in the Ed and Workforce Committee here federally where we had 3 panel witnesses. One was a federal educational bureaucrat, and one was a local school superintendent, and I was trying to make a point. So I asked the local school superintendent, can you name, by name, kids in your school district who have unique challenges, what those challenges are, and how to address them? And she said, absolutely, absolutely. And I asked the federal educational bureaucrat, can you name, by name, any of the children in this lady's school district and the unique challenges they face and how to best address them? And she said, of course not. So I guess what I'm driving at here is the answer, I believe, is at the federal level at least, at the national government level, to block grants, to send money to states and localities, and then say, hey, Prince Edward County, we want you to create an alternative pathway. Here's the money to try to do it, to educate kids who learn differently. Because you learn differently doesn't mean you don't learn.
Right.
And that's the thing. We can't quantify. Sorry, I get passionate about this too. The talent that's been wasted.
Right. Right.
And every young person in this country, including the shooter at Parkland,
right,
with proper intervention, with proper treatment, I think is capable of doing something good. Now, maybe not this year, but if we'd have gotten to that kid 10 years ago with a different set of messages and a different set of expectations, right? The only thing that George W. Bush said that I think was brilliant was the soft bigotry of low expectations. We have to demand our children give us the best they can give us, or try to. And if we do that, we're going to get great things. And the great things will be irrespective of locality, they'll be irrespective of socioeconomic background, they'll be irrespective of race, creed, or national origin. They'll be great things. That's what we have to do. So the paradigm should be powering money and decisions down to localities, where that teacher knows which kid needs help, where that superintendent knows that there's some kids. Sorry, that's my baby.
That's all right.
There's some kids that learn differently than others, and then not stigmatizing those kids.
Right.
Right. I mean, when I speak to young people, and it's a priority for me. Again, 41 public high schools. We've been to 29. When I'm in a room, I say somebody in this room is the last in the class, somebody in this room is the first in class, and both of you are equally able to succeed. The fundamental rights of an American are that they should have an opportunity. We should try to make it equal. But they should have an opportunity, and that as long as they're not hurting anybody, they're helping people, they should be able to define success however they want. And we don't give that message. Instead, we say, you got to go to college. Right. Or you got to do whatever makes you happy as long as you're making the world a better place. Right. And what we should do is help you do that.
That's right. Thank you, Congressman.
So thank you, and God bless you, and the passion. I get it. I just, again, I got to the state senate, and I got stuck on ed and health, and I thought, what am I going to do? And then I realized, man, I carried the bill that rolled back the SOL testing burdens. Look, I like accountability, but I don't like testing creative teachers and students into oblivion. Right. Tried to champion educational options for parents who sort of are at their wits' end because the system might work for most kids, but it's not working for theirs. Right. This is very important, and thank you for your passion.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
Yes, ma'am. God bless you.
Well, with that question, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to a conclusion of this month's telephone town hall with this District Congressman Tom Garrett.
Oh, well,
for those of you,
you heard him.
For those of you who would like to receive notifications for our next telephone town hall, which will be occurring next month, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/live.
And also, I would ask if you have the information to get on this town hall, and you feel like there's somebody you know, and they don't have to agree with me. By gosh, I'd love to have people on who vehemently disagree with me, because that's who we are as a nation. Please share that information. Please reach out. And I'm interrupting Matt. I think Bedford won the last telephone town hall for number of calls.
Yes, sir, they did.
Albemarle is the winner this time. We've covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different localities on this town hall, which is one of the reasons we like them. We've probably literally by land area covered about, let me do some quick math, 8,000 square miles of ground. It would have been very difficult to do it in any other way, so thank you all for being on. I'll hand it back over to Matt.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Thank you all again for joining us, and this is Matt signing off, and we will see you next month.